So why are more and more Mexicans in the United States specifically identifying with the indigenous part of their identity? There's actually a lot of historical progression behind the political ideology of indigenismo to explain this. Indigenismo is this political ideology and cultural movement to understand the relationship between the Mexican state and its indigenous peoples. In the 19th century, indigenismo was not yet federal policy, but it played an important role in the development of Mexican identity during the nation-building era. We're essentially a new state, a new country here, and we needed to define what Mexican was. Mexicans essentially centralized around this idea of mestizaje. There was a lot of racism that was prevalent in this time. For example, if you look at historical images of Vicente Guerrero, which is an indigenous, African, and Spanish head of state, you would see whitewashed images of him. Even with AI today, whitewashed images of him. But the big idea here was that the Mexican identity was a mixed race identity, which in contrast to the United States diverges greatly. Now, it wasn't until the 20th century where indigenismo became federal policy, particularly in the constitutional reforms post-revolutionary Mexico with Lázaro Cárdenas. However, there were some glaring issues with how this was carried out, particularly with education. That was one of the ways to invest in indigenous people in Mexico. But people that are familiar with Native American history in the United States knows that education, especially as a tool by the state, can sometimes lead to indoctrination, can sometimes lead to bad things. So this education was essentially centered around integration and assimilation, practicing the Spanish language and getting rid of indigenous history. This isn't to say that someone like Lázaro Cárdenas was a terrible person that didn't care about the indigenous people. He did care about them, but it was just carried out in a poor manner, and that developed and improved over time. Now, the big progression from the 20th to the 21st century is that the Mexican government stopped using a top-down approach, which were largely mestizo people defining indigenous policy, and rather had indigenous people lead it. And some of the biggest breakthroughs in this space is recognizing indigenous languages as official Mexican languages, which affords more legal rights and education rights. And when you intersect this with things like the proliferation of the internet, or more Mexicans in the United States receiving higher education in college, you start to see more flourishing of the culture and identity. And this affects, pasty looking people like me today, because when I was in college, I was studying Mesoamerican history, I was taking Latin American study courses, even as a software engineer, someone studying computer science. And a couple of years ago, I never really thought that I was going to be studying and learning indigenous languages, and even going as far as trying to teach it as I learn. And because of this movement and because of this recognition, it's not this part of our identity that we bury away into our past. It's something that we can revitalize and understand better. I would love to get more, but I only got 3 minutes here. So, if you appreciated this, give a like and a follow, check out my work. I think you guys would like it and appreciate it, all right? Peace, folks. Man, I wanted to say so much more, but I just don't got time on this